Kicking off the list with the bear. I wanted to start off with this one because it's actually a story a buddy of mine told me from when he used to work as a camp counselor. So yeah, he would take kids out on these like long treks through the woods on these canoe trips. And he'd be about like 2 weeks long, some of them. And one day they were out, they'd found a camping spot and they put up their tents and everything for the night. They'd had a fire, everyone went to bed, the counselors were in their tents, and then they heard a sound which sounded like a large animal stalking around in the woods, kind of around their campsite. They kind of whispered to each other like, what should we do? We have all these campers here with us. They obviously have to protect them. They got out of their tents and they decided to shoot off a flare. They had some flares specifically for bear encounters. And at this point, they pretty much know it's a bear. Like they hear it growling and it's like, yeah, it's pretty clear what this is. They fire the flare off in the direction where they're hearing this growling. And it's nighttime now, so they can't really see anything. But as the flare starts shooting through the woods, it just illuminates this big, like, black bear, like just kind of illuminated through the flare. At which point, it luckily turns around and runs into the forest. But yeah, suffice to say, they're pretty shook after that. Like, what would they have done if the bear didn't decide to run away? Yeah, freaky stuff. Alright, next up we have a tale I'm going to call The Vanishing Man. This story was posted to Reddit by user Throwaway Friend, and I gotta say, if this happened to me, I'd be shaken up for a long time. I definitely felt a chill up my spine reading this one, so here it goes. Back in 2015, I was on a hiking trail in Arizona. I have hiked a lot in worse terrains in Europe, so I wasn't too worried about doing it alone. It was almost getting dark, and I was at an eerily deserted stretch for what felt like hours now. Suddenly, I heard a kind of music. As I kept going, I realized it was someone whistling. It gave me the creeps, but the idea of company relieved me a bit, too. Soon enough, I saw a man in front of me walking the same direction. He was wearing a t-shirt and pants, which was surprisingly inadequate, especially for the impending night. I passed him by. He was the one whistling, indeed. Turned to say the customary greetings. He looked up, deadpan, and without a word, turned back down towards the ground and kept whistling. He was walking slowly in an almost trance-like manner. I quickly averted my gaze forward, and almost abruptly, the whistling stopped. I turned back to see what had happened, and there was absolutely no one on the trail. Zilch. Didn't even feel like anyone had been there. At our number 8 spot, we have The Skeleton. The story was posted to Reddit by WhaleHeart0129. When they were 11, they went camping with their mom, her boyfriend, and their little brother outside of Las Vegas, in the middle of the desert. One morning, the group decided to go arrowhead hunting. During their hike, they stumbled on a full human skeleton laid out on a blanket, tucked under a bush. The person appeared as if they had fallen asleep and never woken up. The boyfriend knelt down, offering a prayer over the remains, and then they all walked back to the campsite in complete silence, each person just shocked by what they'd seen. They promptly contacted the ranger, and the boyfriend later got into a helicopter to guide them to the location of the remains. Turned out to be a young man who had been missing for almost a year.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Troy Knapp. Often referred to as the Mountain Man, Troy had an early start on his criminal history, and this history is what landed him in prison for burglary. After being released while on parole in 2004, Troy really fell off the map because he began to live a life on the run, living in the wilderness. By the time 2007 rolled around, authorities in southern Utah were investigating a string of cabin burglaries that they believed were all committed by one person, and it wasn't until 2012 that this person would be identified as Troy Knapp. They were able to confirm this through cabin surveillance photos as well as a fingerprint that was left behind on a bottle of alcohol. From his disappearance in 2004 until his eventual capture in 2013, Troy survived by breaking into people's cabins, sleeping in the owner's beds, eating their food, food and listening to their radios for any updates on the hunt to find him. He would also sometimes steal items from the cabin, including weapons and camping supplies, which he used to help him live in the woods until the next cabin break-in. As authorities closed in on him in 2013, Troy decided to try and shoot at federal agents in a helicopter as they flushed him out of the home he was staying in. Luckily, none of the officers were harmed and Troy was captured that day. In the end, Troy received a plea deal for all of the crimes committed and received a sentence that could see him being released in 2024. In our number 6 spot today, we have Mincho Donchev. This is the name of a convicted killer who went on the run in the woods after escaping from a Bulgarian prison. Well, actually, Mincho escaped from the prison, moved to the United States, was convicted in Seattle for trying to burn down a home in 1985, and after this is when he fled to the woods. For over 10 years, Mincho lived this life on the lam. He moved through Washington state. He carried on by stealing food, clothes, and other supplies from nearby vacation cabins. Of course, the multitude of break-ins caused an investigation to begin, and eventually he was caught and arrested for these crimes. Once he was arrested again, I assumed he would likely be returned to Bulgaria to finish out his sentence for the killing, but in the end he was no longer wanted in Bulgaria because the statute of limitations had expired. In the United States, however, he was once again tried and convicted, this time for all of the break-ins and robberies he committed over the decade. In our number 5 spot today, we have Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is most often referred to as the Unabomber due to the atrocious crimes that he committed. He was known as being quite bright from a young age, and it is believed that he had an IQ of about 167. He was accepted into Harvard at the age of just 16 years old, and he went on to receive a PhD. At 25, things were still looking bright for the guy. He had landed himself a job as an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but 2 years later he resigned from that position and his life took quite a drastic and dark turn. In 1971, it is said that Ted moved to a remote cabin in Montana that had no electricity or running water, and from 1971 until 1977, Ted learned to live a hermit, off-the-grid lifestyle while learning different survival skills. But once 1978 rolled around, he was ready to start his terror campaign. From here until 1995, he began a nationwide bombing against people who were involved with modern technology. He planted these weapons or would mail them, and in the end it took the lives of 3 people and severely injured 23. Just like many of these kinds of people, his own ego and delusions got in the way, because on April 24th, 1995, he sent an anonymous handwritten letter that was addressed to the police via the New York Times. His own brother ended up recognizing his handwriting, however, and that's the tip that he gave to the FBI. Ted was captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Deserter. Back in 2015, police in the far east of Russia discovered a man who is said to have been a deserter of the army 11 years prior and who had been hiding in the woods ever since. The man was in his 30s and had been wanted since he disappeared from his post back in 2014, which was 1 year after he was conscribed. It actually turns out that when found, authorities weren't looking for him anymore. This was because a few months after he initially left his post, some of his family members had identified his body, which led to him being declared dead. So imagine the officer's surprise when they found him very much alive. In the end, he was found after residents of a local village reported seeing a suspicious inhabitant who had settled nearby. The man was able to survive by foraging for berries and mushrooms, and he built a small house using old construction materials. And during his time living off-grid, he worked at a pig farm and went fishing to earn some kind of a living and surely to feed himself. During his 11 years living in the woods, authorities don't believe he ever tried to contact anyone, friends or family. The man was detained after his discovery, but it's not clear if any charges were ever pressed due to the amount of time that had passed. In our number 3 spot today, we have Christopher Knight. Christopher is a person who was quite reclusive, and he lived alone in the woods in Maine. He loved being alone and loved living a simple life, which definitely sounds fine enough, and it's said that save for 2 brief interactions, he lived without human contact for 27 years from 1986 to 2013. I'm certainly not judging, I'm genuinely just wondering what that sort of thing would do to a person. Here's where things get sort of unbelievable though. While living this totally secluded life in the woods of Maine, he was living in a small camp that he had set up that was kind of hidden from everyone because it was within a cluster of glacial erratic boulders. When he entered the woods, he had almost no possessions, which of course would make things difficult to survive, but he made a a little home and set up for himself entirely out of stolen items. That's right, this guy would go around to other camps and cabins nearby and steal their stuff. Roughly 40 burglaries a day in order to continue on surviving while having no contact with anyone else. I guess the guy didn't really have any scary motives, but of course you absolutely cannot steal people's belongings. Eventually he was caught mid-burglary and he confessed to all of the other crimes, and he did describe his understanding of how unethical his behavior was, and it was determined he was very unlikely to reoffend. Christopher spent 7 months in jail, he paid $2,000 in restitution, and he completed a court program and 3 years of probation. After his release, he went on to meet with the judge every week, he avoided alcohol, and he even secured a job with his brother. There have been many articles written about Christopher's pretty fascinating story, and people are always trying to get to the bottom of why he lived his life like this. He is quite reluctant to share, but what he has said is, quote, "Solitude bestows an increase in something valuable, my perception, but when I applied my increased perception to myself, I lost my identity. There was no audience, no one to perform for. To put it romantically, I was completely free." In our number 2 spot today, we have David Lidstone. For nearly 3 decades, 81-year-old David Lidstone has lived in the woods of New Hampshire in a small cabin that is fit with solar panels to provide him power. I'll be honest, David is not a terrifying person, and in fact it seems as though he really minded his own business. He grew his own food, cut his own firewood, and spent his time tending to the chickens he had, as well as the pet cat. He was just a man living an off-the-grid life, but a few years ago an unfortunate revelation came to life that threatened everything that David had built. David actually found himself being arrested after he was accused of squatting on private property for the 27 years he was living in this self-sustained cabin because the man who owns the land wanted Dave and his cabin gone. The land that the cabin sits on has been owned by the same family since 1963, and while David claims that many years ago the owner gave him his word allowing him to live there, unfortunately he failed to get this promise in writing. This has led to the situation where the current owner now sees him as a squatter. The landowner claims to have not even known of David's presence until 2015 when a town administrator brought it to his attention due to some concerns over the property. While many people, especially kayakers and boaters who have come to know Dave quite well over the years since his cabin sits right on the river, have offered to help cover the costs to allow him to stay, even if the landowner agreed, unfortunately his way of life is in violation of local and state zoning and environmental regulations, and there is no access to a road. Unfortunately, while in jail, the cabin David had spent all those years in ended up burning down, with the fire being ruled accidental. After his release, supporters of David were able to find him temporary housing while he figures out what comes next for him. In our number 1 spot today, we have The Wild Man. This encounter story is a bit different than the others on this list today because of the time period it takes place in, and because we have actually no idea who this person living in the woods really was. Let's take it back to 1877. Gold miners are traveling through the Globe Valley in Caldwell County, North Carolina. As they traveled through, they encountered what they later described as a, quote, wild man. The miners were shocked at what they were seeing because he appeared quite a bit taller than many people of the time, estimating this man to be about 6.5 feet. When the man caught a glimpse of the miners, it is said that he quickly turned around and proceeded into the woods. The miners, of course, went to track the man down. It was the 1800s after all, and it is said that they tracked him down to a cave. Here, they found his home, which included the bones of many animals scattered throughout, which showed them that he had clearly been here for a while. At the end of the day, no one is exactly sure who this man was, where he came from, or where he went, but it's clear that he was very comfortable living his life in the middle of the woods.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Jag. Yes, I'm referring to a jaguar. Why in the world someone would desert a beautiful jag in the woods is beyond me. And it's an oldie too. I tried to do some research and I'm pretty sure it's a 1957 Jaguar XK140, if that means anything to any of you car guys or gals watching out there. Jaguars are on my dream car list, so this just makes me sad to see. I'm gonna make up a story as to why it was here. Once upon a time, a couple in their 40s who were deeply in love went on a Sunday morning cruise. They decided to park and go for a walk in the woods, but suddenly Bigfoot jumped out right in front of them and ate them. That was fun. If you like this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up as it really helps us out. In our number 9 spot, we have stripped for parts. Here we have a mysterious car in the woods that looks like it has been stripped for parts. Yes, I know this tale. It happened to a friend of mine who owned this car. Yes, times were tough and he realized that he didn't have enough money to buy groceries. Damn. He realized that he had this car. The car as a whole wasn't worth much, but separately the parts were. So he took the car out to the woods with a plan to take it apart. But when he was out there trying to take apart the car, he remembered something that he hadn't thought of before making this plan. He had no muscles. In fact, he was the weakest man in town, and just lifting up the hood was a mission. So he gave up and left the car in the woods. The end. In our number 8 spot, we have the clown car. Man, I wish I was a car person so I could tell you what this car is. If there is anyone watching that can name all of the cars on this list accurately, then I will dub you the GOAT of this channel. I shall bow down to you. I can't tell if this car was once orange or white. The orange could be rust, but it's quite vibrant. I'm gonna say there once was an orange car that was obviously driven by a clown that broke down while this clown was on his way to a birthday party. The car was the last straw in a series of unfortunate events that kept happening to him. He decided that this was a sign, and once and for all, he would quit clowning around. And he never looked back. The end.
Next up on the list, we have a story shared by Reddit user Particular Knight 392, who wrote about an odd creature they came face to face with while hiking. So in early 2019, they went hiking with a friend. After walking for at least 30 minutes, they heard rustling in a bush a few feet in front of them, and then a deer emerged, but something about it seemed kinda off. The creature lacked a tail, its ears were unusually small, almost invisible. Its eyes were abnormally large, giving it an almost goat-like appearance. The deer, or whatever this thing was, just stood still, fixated on the hikers. As it began to approach, they noticed something was off about its eyes too. They weren't the usual brown, but a dark, piercing red. Their friend, who was visibly shaken, remained still beside them. When the deer ventured too close for comfort, the friend grabbed their arm and they both ran, not daring to look behind them. Number 6, lights. The Trek is this website dedicated to all things hiking. When readers were asked to share some of their creepiest stories while hiking, Sarah Legg posted this one. It was a long, rainy and cold night. Having just settled into her tent for the night with her canine companion, she was aware of being only a mile from a lengthy dirt road. Any sounds or lights were quickly dismissed as coming from said road. Lying in the tent, she began to hear unsettling noises resembling raindrops on a raincoat, as if someone were moving around the tent. Less than 5 minutes later, a flash of light caught Sarah's attention. She thought maybe another camper had arrived, but she hadn't seen anyone. The lights formed a horizontal pattern around the tent, blinking from left to right as if someone was circling the tent. She tried to tell herself it was just car lights, but then things took an unexpected turn. The lights appeared above the tent, maintaining a perfect formation. Sarah, realizing that the lights couldn't be explained by nearby cars or reflections, started to get really unsettled. She covered her face with her sleeping bag, praying that whatever it was wouldn't pose any harm. She never found out what those lights were. Next up, we have another story shared by a different commenter, Jerry DeJong, on the same Trek site. So some years back, Jerry had been out hiking near Mount Shasta with a buddy. They had set up a camp for the night, cowboy camping by a crackling fire, enjoying cold beers and cooking up a pair of steaks. Then, out of the blue, Jerry's friend took a log and started whacking it against a tree. According to him, it was how Bigfoot communicates. Jerry encouraged him to give it another shot. He knocked at the tree again, and sure enough, a few minutes later, 4 distinct knocks echoed in the distance, loud enough to be something hefty smacking against a tree. Minutes crawled by, and it happened again. Both of them could sense something sizable moving in the forest. 4 knocks, followed by 2, roughly 100 yards away. Next thing they knew, they were packing up camp in record time as the sounds of something large moved in the forest only 20 to 30 yards away. Jerry had heard large animals in the woods before, grizzly bears, elk, moose, but whatever this thing was, it sounded nothing like any of those. And at number 4, we have the banana spider. This is a tale shared with us on Reddit by user Kamala2024. More of an icky discovery than a dark one, but if you have a fear of creepy crawlies, this story is going to make you cringe. So here's the story. Hiking early morning in Hawaii, and my stomach notifies me that it's time to go number 2. I find a porta potty near the trailhead and jump in to do my business. Once complete, I flip my headlamp on to find the toilet paper, but instead find a huge 5 inches in diameter banana spider hanging out in the corner of the porta potty. Trying not to spook it, I slowly reached for the 1-ply. As I do, my headlamp shines on this monster and it proceeds to freak the F out. It runs in circles for a bit, both of us losing our minds at this point, and ends up between my legs inside of my underwear. I'm at a complete loss of what to do, but eventually begin wiggling back and forth in an attempt to get this spider to remove itself. That didn't work at all. Instead of exiting the premises, this mother effer runs up my leg. This is the point where I just give up and storm out of the porta potty, yelling and screaming. Pants around my ankles. No clue what happened to the spider, but it disappeared in a flash, just like my dignity. Our next story is called The Lost Hiker. It was shared by a man named Jeff Fissel. One weekend, Jeff headed down to Wilson's Creek Wilderness for a camping trip with a buddy. As the night settled in, Jeff woke up to find his tent mate crouched over him brandishing a knife. Jeff was obviously pretty petrified, thinking his friend was about to knife him, but trying to keep his cool, he asked, "Hey man, what's going on?" His friend whispered, "Listen," and after what felt like an eternity, a spine-chilling call echoed through the wilderness. Jeff sprang up and grabbed his own knife. The eerie voice drew closer. The unsettling voice lingered nearby, then slowly moved away, still emanating eerie sounds. The next morning, Jeff and his buddy struggled to make sense of the strange encounter. Packed up, and on the trail, they stumbled on an orange ribbon with a message. It was for a lost day hiker who hadn't returned the previous day, suspected to be hungry, cold, and wandering the area all night. That must have been the man making the noises the night before. They realized they likely ignored a lost hiker. The problem was he never really asked for help, only making ghostly moans. Number 2, That's Not Kevin. This one was shared by Cookies Choco, whose friends came face to face with something in the woods that they thought was their friend. The story goes as follows. I was in the woods with 3 friends at night. A friend's house was nearby, and I was getting hungry, so I went inside to find some food. Another friend came inside with me. 2 friends were still outside. Later on, one of the 2 who were outside comes in and sees the indoor friend on the couch next to me. They panic and immediately run back outside. I poke my head out the door asking what's going on, only to hear them yell as loudly as they can, "That's not Kevin!" Everyone comes inside and calms down a bit, and the story comes out. They thought the friend who was indoors with me, Kevin, had been outside with them this entire time. Why? Because in the darkness of the woods, they saw a silhouette about the same height walking alongside them silently. And then at some point, it ran away and they were chasing it, thinking Kevin was running off for some reason. The reason my friend yelled, "That's not Kevin," was to stop the last outdoor friend from chasing whoever was out deeper into the woods. We still have no idea what that was or why they didn't ever speak. Finally, we have what I'm going to call the tale of the happy truck. This is a first-hand account shared to Reddit by Dying Lion. If this story is true, it's up there with some of the eeriest stories I've seen on Reddit. They describe the creepiest experience they had while hiking, not being with any wild animal, but with a little black pickup truck with rainbow and unicorn stickers. They were out walking their dog when they encountered the vehicle. It was blasting bubblegum pop music and smelled like cotton candy when it rolled by. First time it passed, it took a weird swerve toward them like it was aiming to hit. They quickly jumped out of the way, no big deal. Figured the driver may have got spooked seeing someone out at night with the reflective gear, but then the truck circled back and started driving right for them. This time, they were ready, snatched up their dog and jumped into a ditch. The car just missed them. Over the noise of the engine, there was this eerie, high-pitched maniacal laughter, sounding like it was coming from a little girl. The tiny truck pulled the same stunt for a 3rd time, but by then they ducked into a neighbor's shrubbery. From the hiding spot, they watched the little truck slowly cruise down the road, the creepy giggles echoing as it passed. Luckily, it kept on going, never to be seen again.
Starting at number 10, Army Base Stairs. From Reddit user IronBoy21, 3 months ago, they shared their own story. This one is not in the woods, but I say it's a chilling story about stairs nonetheless. This user was on a North American Treaty Organization deployment, or NATO deployment, with the army, and they were the person that sticks their head out of the hatch to look around while someone else is driving a tank. Now, while driving through a huge open field, they spot a staircase and decide to stop because it looks like it'll lead to a crawl space and it seems cool enough to check out basically. They stop and approach it and find some strange markings on the staircase. And then at this point, we know I'd be running, turning around and running for it. But this group decides now we're gonna go check it out. And well, they get inside this strange little space that's big enough for maybe 3 people and find more strange markings, and they find human bones. The person who wrote this thinks a family hiding from war might have hidden in the cellar, but they still think it's odd since it's the only house for at least 100 miles around, since it's in an army training area. And then they end the passage with 3 little words. So, I don't know. They just don't know what happened. But from that mystery, let's move on to number 9. Island Forest Stairs. This is from Coated Lemons on Reddit about 3 months ago as well. They were on an Ohio camping trip up to Lake Erie on a small unknown island a friend told them about. So he sets up camp to eat and hang out and then decides I'm gonna explore the island a bit before it gets dark. 10 minutes in, he finds a structure that he investigates to find it's a stone staircase, but there's no indication that the stairs are remains from a house. There's no rotting wooden structures, no bricks, nothing of the sort. So at that point he felt nothing odd and he was like, and I quote, "Hell yeah, gonna go back to the tent, read a book." But that's when his mood shifted. He got a horrible wave of anxiety and that he should run back to safety. But then again, he thought about the stairs. Then he felt compelled to go to them with his mind in a fog. He said, "It was like a wave of indifference and curiosity washed over me and I had this compulsion to go to them. I drifted over to the bottom, staring at the top. I was staring like a zombie, slowly walking up 2 steps at a time. I felt catatonic. I felt so out of it, so mentally blank, like something in me completely took over and I just acted out of primal steps. I was 3/4 of the way up when I snapped out of it and I ran. I ran as fast as I could. I felt so scared, like in my chest I was tearing up. I was running for my goddamn life." And so after that scary incident I just recounted, he got so mixed up with directions he ended up back at the stairs, freaked out again, and then ran again and somehow made it back to his tent. Then even more weird stuff happened that night, but to keep us on track with stairs, I'll just let you know that once he left, he came back again to the same island with a friend and they searched the entire island but could never find those stairs again. So the mysterious stairs that gave that crazy feeling, who knows where they went. At number 8, Staircase Creek. This next story is from Redditor Sia Vree from a while back, and when she was younger she would go hiking in the woods in California, and one time she had a really trippy experience. She was a little lost admittedly and found a creek so that she could follow it downstream because it's recommended that if you're lost, follow the path of water downstream if you're lost. And at some point she had to step into the water to follow the creek because the sides of the creek were too high, and one of those times she found herself walking down moss-covered stairs. She couldn't really see the bottom of where they went and was nearly slipping due to the water running over the mossy steps. But then, even though it was around noon, the sky turned dark and everything went quiet. This is when she truly tripped and fell, and she says she fell into the dark. She woke up alone in a meadow with marks on her arms with no trace of the staircase or the stream. So the staircase and her just kind of got mixed up. I don't know. But on to in our number 7 spot we have the traffic jam. Okay, this picture is wild. There are at least 10 or maybe more old cars jammed together in the middle of the forest. What in the world could this be? Either a car dealership owner was just like, "Hey, Mario, get rid of them, dump them in the wood." That was a horrible Italian accent. Or it was a fine Sunday morning in 1953 and all of the townsfolk from Bennettsville, South Carolina were driving to the woods to go to the annual summer picnic. They all parked their cars in the woods and then went on to their lunch. But around 3 p.m. that day, an alien spaceship came to Earth and knocked out the power everywhere, which meant none of the cars worked.
All the townspeople had to walk home. So sad. The cars never worked again, and so they left them there. Let me know which story you think would be more likely in the comment section below. I'm going with the latter. In our number 6 spot, we have the 90s mom car. This mysterious abandoned car was obviously left behind by a 90s mom who was probably driving with her 2 kids one Friday morning to visit their grandma. With Dunkaroos in hand and Backstreet Boys on the radio, the kids were happy, and if they were happy, she was happy. Finally, she didn't have to hear them whine for 5 minutes. While driving, they spotted a lake with a bunch of swans in it, so they pulled over to get a closer look. She didn't realize until she got back to the car that the gas had been leaking out of the car, and now she was out of gas and couldn't go anywhere. It was cold, so the kids went back to whining. They walked for about 20 minutes to find a payphone when suddenly they saw those big, holy golden arches that bring everyone joy. Hooray, they said. God bless McDonald's. All was well, the end. That's probably what happened. In our number 5 spot, we have the gangster car. Don't ask me what kind of car this is because the only reply you will get is, a gangster's car? This looks like the kind of car you would see an Italian gangster own in old movies. Who actually owned it and its real story, who knows? It looks like it could have also been owned by Gatsby. Whoever owned it though, most likely was rich because even if you owned a car during this time, that meant that you had more money than most. There's also a boat beside it that was also seemingly deserted, so I can imagine that clearly whoever owned these very pricey items were discarding them because they were, evidence in a top secret crime committed by the CIA themselves. Yes, this car and this boat is evidence of their involvement in many dirty dealings, and so if you want to, once and for all, expose the CIA for doing the opposite of what they're meant to do and committing crimes themselves, then go and look for this car and boat. In our number 4 spot, we have the backyard of cars. There is an old abandoned house in the UK with a giant backyard filled with old cars. Why, you may ask? Well, there is actually an interesting story behind it that is supposed to be true. Actually, this one I'm not making up. Apparently the owner was obsessed with the idea of World War III happening, and so he collected a bunch of cars to eventually sell for scrap metal, but unfortunately he passed away, and so the cars and the property have been sitting there abandoned for 20 years. He probably was a fan of John Titor, the time traveler who warned everyone that World War III was coming. Probably. In any case, it's quite the sight to see as the cars are now covered in rocks and plants and have kind of become one with the earth. Apparently all the cars are classic cars, and even though none of them are extremely rare, it has been said that it is quite the collection to see. In our number 3 spot, we have the garbage car. Okay, this car kind of makes me queasy to look at because it was clearly used to store garbage. But why, I wonder. It looks like it's been stuffed to the rim with paint cans possibly. Honestly, I don't know what that is. If you can make it out, let me know. Some kind of tin can. It just makes me sad to see. Couldn't they have found a garbage bag to put them in? Why the car? Couldn't they have sold its parts or at least brought it to a junkyard? Maybe the owner couldn't have and they needed to leave it. I don't know. Maybe underneath those cans though is the skeleton of a body, and that's why they're packed to the rim. To convince people that it's just filled with garbage when really it's covering up a crime. Dun dun dun. In our number 2 spot, we have the Mustang. This abandoned car has created a bit of an uproar online as Mustang lovers are quite hardcore, or so I have now learned. Again, not too much of a car person, so this is news to me, but yeah, this car being deserted has made people sad. I wish I could tell all of you Mustang lovers where it is so you could go and see it, but sadly no location to report. It's probably hidden deep in the woods where no one can find it because its owner was so obsessed with it that he thought if he couldn't drive it, then no one can. And on that train of thought, he thought no one should be able to see it as well. It was his precious. In our number 1 spot, we have the vibrant blue car. This vibrant blue car that's been abandoned looks like it was possibly a part of a crash. The angle of the picture isn't great, so it's kind of hard to see if it actually crashed into the back of perhaps a green car in front of it or not. You can't really tell. However, the hood of the car looks like it's dented slash bending upwards, if that makes sense, which would indicate a crash. Also, I'm not sure if those are airbags that have blown up in the car, but it sure looks like it could be. Either that, or there is just a lot of garbage that has piled up in the car from over time. In any case, it looks like it was quite the pretty car in its prime. I'm not one to like colored cars, honestly. I like your basic black or white, but this blue is really pretty. I would never ever buy a car this color, but I can admire it from afar.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Demon Summoner. Oh, hello there. What would you do if you came across this in the woods? Now, on first glance, I would assume it was just there as a prank to freak me out, but perhaps if I knew that this satanic idol was now in the Ed and Lorraine Warren Museum for the Occult, I might be a little bit more freaked out. It seems that a hunter was out in the woods one day when he came across this horned beastie with wide blue eyes. At first, he didn't quite notice it as it blended in with the woodland, but then he saw it, started, and decided to investigate. The man said that when he walked up to the doll, he felt a very, very horrible feeling. All of his energy was drained and he was filled with dread. He said he turned away from the idol and then saw a man with white hair wearing a black cloak walking exactly opposite to him. He asked the man how to get out of the woods, and in silence the cloaked figure simply pointed. Haunted by the feeling that the doll in the woods gave him, the hunter called up paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. It seemed that the horned idol is used for satanic rituals for summoning evil spirits. The investigators went to look for it for themselves in order to check it out, and Lorraine was particularly affected by the piece, saying it sent her into a catatonic state for days. She even claimed that it made her levitate. This scary item found in the woods now lives in her basement in Monroe, Connecticut. Coming into number 9, we have the cabin. Who lives in a cabin in the woods, and what do they do for the majority of their time? Well, you may not want to know the answer. Mark Andre worked for the Environmental Services in Arcata, California, and was marking trees in the deep, deep woods when he came across a cabin. Okay, anyone seen Cabin in the Woods? Because it is terrifying, and this is like that. An actual cabin in the woods. The structure was around 12 feet by 15 feet and properly constructed. They knew what they were doing. Andre said, "I didn't see it until I was around 12 feet away from it. It was a perfect out of the way spot where it wouldn't be detected." Now he went to investigate further, and it seemed as if the cabin was abandoned but had been lived in recently. There was a lot of tin food, a number of knives in the hut, an eclectic selection of books including Catch Me If You Can, and a manifesto called Difference Everywhere, which included statements such as "community creates its own outlaws." What outlaw was hiding deep in the woods? We don't know because they were never found. Coming into number 8, we have the giant spider web. Oh hell no. Absolutely not. This looks like some kind of woodland Halloween decoration. In 2007, a walker was out for a hike in the woodland outside of Dallas when they came across this truly disconcerting scene. Honestly, huge spiderwebs covering large trees. If I walked through this, I would actually run in the other direction for fear of being eaten by a giant tarantula. It turns out the menaces behind the mess are Guatemalan long-jawed spiders, which do look horrifying, and they're only an inch long, so maybe not quite tarantulas, but still, spooky spiders. That would be enough to get me screaming. Anyway, the web came from an infestation of them, meaning there were millions, yes you did hear me correctly, millions of spiders in the area. It also happened in a similar part of Texas in 2015. These spiders need to be stopped.
7. Phantom stairs. So this story of stairs is from user Pope_Fenderson_2 on Reddit. 4 years ago, this person left a story from an experience they had as a child. They were out with older relatives in bright daylight when they spotted stairs about 60 yards away and walked towards them until they were about 20 feet away. They said the stairs were made of wood, clean and polished with no dust and no leaves. Kinda weird. And once they were that close, the light around them got dimmer and they looked back at their family. But their family looked much farther away than they actually were, and then a feeling of sheer terror hit them, so they just ran back. Once they got back to their family and told them what happened, they looked back, gestured, and the stairs were gone. When this poster's uncle heard the story, he became stern, saying, "There are things that appear different every time, these stairs or anything else, and these things lead to the spirit world, so avoid them." After this occurrence, the commenter lays down medicine and says a prayer of protection, then gets away whenever they see these stairs, and they recommend smudging yourself at the end of the day if you come across these things yourself. If you aren't worried or anything, at least, sage and smudging, it smells good, so it's never a bad idea. But on to number 6, waterproof stairs. From Melandon on Reddit, also 4 years ago, they went on a hike in the Cascades when he found 6 carpeted wood steps out in the woods and decided to investigate. It had begun to rain, but he wasn't fazed. And he kind of felt they were odd, but when he went up to them, the world kind of tilted slightly and sounded different. Like tinny different. And then as he went to step on the bottom step, he found himself not wanting to, and then sat down on the steps instead. Then he kicked off his boots and stepped on the carpet in his socks, which was oddly clean, but even more strange, it was dry. It had been raining for a while at this point, so that was kind of odd. And then he walked to the top of the stairs in his socks, and he described it as if the sound shifted even more, as if the sound was forming to a point, and then he stood there, was like, and went back down and left. So nothing bad happened, but it was a strange experience because it wasn't raining on the stairs and the sound was weird. But on to number 5, protected stairs. Now this was posted by Von Meowstein about 3 years ago, and they loved wandering in the woods either alone or with friends, and they'd come across stairs every often, not really thinking much of it. Then one time they were out looking with friends and came upon a dog that looked kind of like a wolf, aka a husky, and it was sitting by a set of stairs. And so the writer of this story approaches the dog that turns out to be friendly, but then wants to check out the stairs to see if there's any puppies, like I'd do that. But the thing is, when they do this, the husky tries to nudge them back to their group. And at the time, they thought this was the possibility of the dog trying to get some food from them, but on second thought, maybe it was a warning away from the stairs. They kind of left kind of confused, but if anything, the dog was protecting them. But on to number 4, survival stairs. Redditor Nizagard posted their own story about when they were on an island southeast of Alaska on an army survival test. Having few supplies, living in a dense forest and living off nature, he came across a random staircase in the middle of this dense forest. His army buddies write off this account of this experience because he was out alone in the wood for 3 days, but he swears he saw this. A staircase that was perfectly clean, just stark in the middle of the forest, no fallen leaves on it or anything. Then there was a strange feeling telling him not to investigate it when he puts his feet up on the staircase. Then he feels nauseous as the sounds around him fade away, something we've heard before, and then he snaps out of it, running far away without looking back. He says it freaks him out to this day, and it was an experience that came out of nowhere, and then now still, no one believes him. I feel like a lot of people are getting the nauseous in the sounds. But let's see where it leads with number 3, stairs lead to fall. Now this is from a deleted account, but a pair of people found remnants of an old house that must have been around from the 50s or the 60s, and the house was gone, but some furniture remained, plus an eerie metal staircase. So this guy that found it, plus his friend Matt, found it weird too, because there was moss winding around it and some green mold, but Matt decided to check it out. This story goes downhill from here. Matt made it to the top, but when he got there, he became so nauseous that he threw up and fell from the top of the stairs. Although it was about an 8-foot drop, Matt let out a scream because it turns out he had gruesomely broken his leg. After some quick first aid, the two noticed the woods became silent, except for a scream similar to the one Matt let out when he fell, heard further away. Then it was closer, and it had a lower tone and a kind of sound like it was wheezing. So they got up to start to leave, and there it was again, the wheezing scream, maybe 30 feet away, and then they tried to move as fast as they could. The screams from then on became more distant until they were finally out of the woods and able to get Matt some needed medical attention. But the person who wrote this said they moved away since then and warned people to stay away from things that make them feel off. So that's not an experience you want to have, really. On to number 2, stairs all the way down. Now, Redditor NebR_stairs from 4 years ago made their account just to talk about their stairs they found southeast in Nebraska. They were with some friends investigating the ruins of an abandoned farm, and they discovered a staircase going down. A lot of them we see are going up, and they say it was separate from the house ruins there, made out of brick, well engineered, and the group walked down for at least 3 flights of stairs with this horrible sense of dread. They described it as time slipping, sounds going away, and their flashlights going in and out. And they said that the stairs continued further down the 3 flights, but water limited the rest of their descent down, so who knows how far down they could go. But on to number 1, Amazon stairs. And this was from V838 on Reddit. So this is a story from a commenter's grandma that lived in an indigenous community in the Amazon long ago. Now, people tended to get lost around the area, including this story that her grandma told about an old man. He left to go check on the fishing nets in the river but was lost for 2 weeks, only found after women doing their laundry in the river found him trying to empty water out of a canoe with a bowl while it was raining. Now, the older man said that when he was out he saw a set of stairs in the forest and climbed them. Then he only remembers being in that canoe out in the water for 2 hours, but he was missing for 2 weeks. People had been looking for him and had been to that area. And then another thing, he said he was taking out water from the canoe because there was a hole in it, but that's not the case. There were no holes apparently. And yes, there was water, but that's because it was raining. And he had begun to damage the wood in the canoe from dragging the bowl he was using across the same area, so how long was he really out there? What happened with the staircase? I want to know. It's just weird, man. You know, it's kind of weird.
At number 10 we have Project Amber. Project Amber is a very interesting travel channel. It follows Lance and his dog as they take a camper van through a lot of the UK and some of Europe. It's an interesting perspective to see how you can get by on very minimal resources. Now, for the most part, this is just a regular travel channel, but on one episode he runs into something very strange. He's driving through the woods in France and stops at a place to camp. He's doing a video breakdown and his dog keeps staring at an old locked up well, as if there's someone standing there. Lance is a little freaked out by this but keeps on doing the video. Later, when the cameras were off, he was approached by a bald woman wearing no shoes walking through the forest. He tries to speak to her but she doesn't communicate, and then she continues walking into the woods. He tries to follow her to see if she's okay, but then she's gone. It's endless woods for miles, so who knows where she could have gone. And then later he sees this.
I'm gonna leave.
The girl's running through the woods alone. Well, this is enough to get Lance freaked out, so he hightails it out of there and heads to a location which is over 50 miles away to leave this creepy mystery forest lady behind. At number 9 we have Mexican Fire Ghost. If you're going for a nice drive through a Mexican forest at night, you know how you casually go on night drives through the woods? Well, this might happen to you. Turns out in the forest of Texcla there is a flaming ghost that wants to eat your soul. Let's have a look. Now that's one of the scariest things I've seen in my whole life. I think I'm gonna have nightmares about that for 30 years. Apparently this ghost had popped up several times before they caught it on video. I don't know if this burning phantom really wants to eat your soul, but there's no way a flaming specter can be good for the environment. Think of the forest fires. At number 8 we have Yeti. Russian dashcam videos are literally the best thing in the world. They capture everything. You see gunfights, explosions, car crashes, and now footage of a mythical beast walking through the snow. Let's check it out. Imagine seeing that running around in the wild. I would hope that it isn't like eating people because we're like cousins or something. Aren't we related to Yetis? I don't know if they're real. But these guys are super freaked out, obviously, because they just saw something that most people think don't exist. I don't know what they're saying because it's in Russian, but if anyone cracks the code, please leave it in the comments below. By crack the code, I mean if anyone speaks Russian.
Coming in at number 7 we have The Switch. I found this picture posted on a chat forum for mountain biking. Now one biker was off-road going through the woods and came across what looked like a satanic lectern and a wooden book. How long it had been there? Well, who knows. Now they opened up the book and found a switch. What it turns on, or indeed off, again, nobody knows. Coming into number 6 we have The Sour Pile. Sometimes things are freaky because they're so inexplicable. The strangest things provoke the biggest questions. There is definitely a story behind this strange discovery. I just don't know what it is. Lumber posted this image to Reddit last year simply saying a giant pile of zested lemons found in the woods. Like, I'll say. There are literally hundreds upon hundreds of peeled lemons in a pile, but like, why? This scares me more than a number of points on this list because I've just got so many questions. One of the commenters, Junk Pile, wrote, perhaps it's a diversion. They didn't notice the shallow grave directly behind them. I mean, that's a good point. What were the lemons hiding? Coming into number 5 we have The Mask. So I do a lot of hiking and I've seen a few creepy things, mostly like snakes in the path, but I can't imagine what I would do if I was hiking along a trail, just enjoying the fresh air, and then look down to find this. Like, Hey there, bud. Who are you staring at? This is a metal mask that by the look of the oxidization is a copper mask. It kind of looks a bit like the one that Hannibal Lecter was forced to wear in The Silence of the Lambs. There is a long history of prisoners being made to wear masks in jail. Now, is this the mask of an escaped prisoner? The mask was found by a hiker who posted their discovery on Reddit, sending shivers down the spine of the internet. Coming into number 4, we have the pipes. When you see weird pipes poking out of the ground in the wood, you know that that isn't the full story. This story comes from northern Germany, where 2 friends were trying to investigate where the pipes went. And who did they find out? It seems that they discovered the entrance to a secret bunker by opening up a wooden lid with a crowbar. They then found steps and bravely went inside. There was a long corridor and a series of small rooms like prison cells. Some of the rooms were bigger and some of them were flooded. Now the rusted metal in the water gave it a reddish tinge like blood. They found abandoned shoes and gloves too. Who did they belong to? The hiker described the day as the spookiest trip of my life. I certainly see that. That would terrify me. Coming into number 3, we have the skin. In August 2016, a walker in Westbrook, Maine spotted this huge piece of shed snake skin on a trail. They then photographed it and showed it to the police. The discovery of a 100 feet long piece of skin came as reports of a huge serpent were made months before. Now on investigation, it was concluded that the skin came from a python, estimated to be around 10 or more feet in length. Why the skin was so long, I'm not sure. At the time, police warned locals to be on the lookout for a snake on the loose. Now the mystery reptile was dubbed Wessie and even earned itself a folk song and was honoured by a local brewery that named an IPA after it. I have to say, I feel a lot better about a beer than I do a giant snake. Wessie has still never been found and could be on the loose even to this day in the woods of Maine. Maybe she has a band of not so little Wessies alongside her too. Ugh. Coming into number 2, we have the Shrine to the Missing. In a turn of events similar to the Blair Witch Project, a hiker by the name of James Rankin discovered a truly worrying shrine in the woods near Long Island's Berkeley-Jackson County Park. There was a collection of around 25 real missing persons photographs taped to trees, a collapsed wooden cage surrounding a filled hole. Rankin recorded his findings, and here is a clip.
Anyway, I'll cut right to the chase because I might die. Look what these f***ing are.
The missing people's posters were of real people, which is pretty stressful. It seems that Rankin was genuinely worried that he'd stumbled across a murderer's lair. The hiker also found what looked like a campsite with a tent, dirty bedding, open cans of food, and a shovel. To me, this genuinely looks like the campsite of a murderer. Finally, coming into number 1, we have the bodies. The Akigahara forest has had a lot of airtime since village idiot Logan Paul went exploring Japan's infamous suicide spot at the end of 2017. The heavy wooded area spans 13.5 square miles and is northwest of the base of beautiful Mount Fuji. The forest was initially a great place for a hike amid nature. Some of the trees there are 300 years old, and in the winter, tourists can see a beautiful ice cave. But it soon gained a morbid reputation for being a place where people came to take their own lives. Now it seems that around 100 people a year venture to the forest never to return, and sadly this has somewhat ruined the forest as a place to hike. Walkers are regularly spotting abandoned tents, half cut down nooses, or if they're unlucky like Logan Paul, an actual decomposing body. I honestly can't think of anything worse to find while I'm out in the woods. Beyond that, local lore has it that ghosts, or yuri, haunt the forest. Now these are special types of Japanese spirits that are trapped spirits of people that killed themselves and want nothing more than to torment the living, like they were tormented in real life.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Eric Freen. This real piece of work is responsible for a horrible attack that took place in 2014. On September 12th, 2014, during a shift change late at night at the trooper barracks of the Pennsylvania State Police in the Pocono Mountains in the township of Blooming Grove, Pennsylvania, Eric, hiding from sight, opened fire at the officers, which sadly ended up taking the life of Corporal Brian K. Dixon II II, who was a 38-year-old Pennsylvania State Police trooper, and it also critically injured Trooper Alex Douglas. Through the discovery of a vehicle that was partially submerged in a pond 3 days after this incident, Eric was able to be identified as the only suspect in the crime, which is when the manhunt really began. By September 24th, there was 1,000 officers looking for him, even utilizing tracking dogs, as Eric continued to successfully evade them because of his extensive knowledge of survival skills. In the end, Eric was captured by US Marshals in an open field near an unused airport hangar 48 days after his crimes took place. One thing that I really like that the officers who arrested him did is that they used the handcuffs of Officer Brian Dixon to restrain him. They also used his squad car to transport the criminal. On April 19th, 2017, Eric was found guilty on all of the charges brought against him, and on April 26th, the jury recommended the death penalty, with the formal sentence of lethal injection being given the next day. He still remains on death row at SCI Phoenix, which is a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania. In our number 9 spot today, we have Eric Rudolph. I guess the Erics just love to go on the run in the woods. This horrible person is responsible for a series of attacks that took place between 1996 and 1998. The first attack took place on July 27th, 1996, when he planted a bomb in Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta as people were gathered there to watch the 1996 Summer Olympics. This blast alone took the life of one woman and injured 100 others, and in a really strange move, before the blast went off, Eric actually called 911 twice to warn of what was about to happen. After this terrible incident, Eric continued on to do horrible things when he placed 2 more bombs in Georgia and 1 in Birmingham, Alabama, which resulted in several injuries and the death of a police officer. Eric was a very skilled outdoorsman, which gave him the opportunity to continually elude authorities for the years he was doing these things. Former FBI executive Chris Swecker, who was the head of the Charlotte FBI office when Eric was arrested, said of Eric's time hiding in the woods that it was actually made possible because, quote, there are so many cabins up there that nobody goes anywhere near because they are owned by people out of town. I think it is very likely that he not only had campsites and caves, but he was also spending time in those cabins. He knew exactly which cabins he could go into. He had them scouted out way ahead of time. He also said when asked if Eric was a survivalist, quote, he was anticipating a great conflict and he had clearly lined up caves and campsites where he could go. He had a number of hiding places and he knew the mountains so well that he could navigate them at night. In the end, on May 31st, 2003, Rudolph was arrested by police officer J.S. Postal while rummaging through a trash bin behind a rural grocery store in Murphy, North Carolina. He received a plea deal which saw him avoiding the death penalty and instead receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. In our number 8 spot today, we have David Sweat and Richard Matt. Back in 2015, 2 men named David Sweat and Richard Matt were serving time in the same prison when they both made a plan to escape, and it worked. The 2 inmates had a plan that involved manipulating 2 prison employees into smuggling in the tools they needed in frozen hamburger meat, after which they were able to cut holes in the steel at the back of their cells. Once they were out of prison, the men were meant to stay together for a while, but things quickly started to fall apart for both of them. Firstly, one of their main accomplices, a prison employee by the name of Joyce Mitchell, failed to show up with a getaway car and supplies, which meant that David and Richard were fleeing to the Canadian border on foot now, not like they had planned. It's important to note that both of these men were quite dangerous, especially David, who had already taken the life of 2 separate people, which is why he was in prison in the first place. For the next 3 weeks, there was a huge manhunt that cost the state of New York $23 million. As the authorities were searching for them day in and day out, the relationship between the 2 escapees started to dwindle because Richard didn't mind the life out in the woods. I mean, it had to have been better than living in prison. David, on the other hand, wanted to follow through and getting to Canada. The 2 spent 18 days in the wilderness together trying to survive, trying to get along, and trying to evade authorities, and this is when the 2 ended up splitting up because of their differences. Richard told authorities, quote, I told Matt, I said, look, there's a cop right there. So I start hauling ass. I said, we gotta move, you're not keeping up. I said, you know what, I hate to do it to him, but I kept my part of the deal, I got him out, and I bolted on him. I just left him there. 3 days after the 2 split up, Richard was found by authorities, but when he failed to drop his weapon, he was killed on the spot. David, on the other hand, was caught 48 hours after Richard, and while he too was injured during the apprehension, he survived, was captured, and was placed right back in prison.
At number 7, we have Strange Howling. Canada has endless forests that go on forever in every direction. There could be anything lurking inside them. There's everything from things that are deadly to things that are pure and innocent. And this mystery howling could be either. Based on what I can hear in this video, I'm going to lean towards dangerous. It's unknown what could be making those noises. Some wildlife experts think it could be some sort of large animal, but that kind of behavior is very unusual. There are those videos where cats try to impersonate dogs, and this could be one of those. Just a different animal like a mountain lion trying to impersonate a wolf or something, or maybe trying to impersonate fear itself. At number 6 we have more howling. It seems like terrifying howling coming from the deep dark woods is a lot more normal than we thought, but it doesn't make it any less scary. We have some more footage from a separate incident in Wisconsin. It's thought that it could be some sort of wounded animal crying out for help. It sounds like it could maybe be a wolf. Let's check it out. That is enough to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. This video sounds a little bit more animalistic than the last, but what kind of creature could make that noise? If it is a wolf, what could be lurking in the woods that is so powerful and threatening that it could make a wolf cry out in fear like that? At number 5 we have an unexpected guest. You're hiking through the woods and you expect to see some nice birds, maybe a cute family of squirrels, but you forget that there's also a bunch of animals that live in the woods that would gladly eat you.
There's a mountain lion right here.
Holy crap, this guy had one of the top predators in the forest just walking up on him like it was nobody's business. This thing has no fear, and this is a few minutes into the video. This cougar has been following him for a while. He stands his ground and tries to get the beast to flee, and I guess the big boy was a little camera shy because he eventually turns and leaves. This guy got very lucky. I feel like those things don't usually turn and run tail. If they want to come at you, then you are done for. Unless you're this guy who killed a mountain lion with his bare hands.
It really clicked after I hit it in the head with a rock and it still didn't release my wrist. That at that point, more drastic measures were necessary.
At number 4 we have more screaming. Even more screaming. Che, how many screaming videos are you going to include on this list? Well, I had to include this one because it seems like it could be some sort of ape-like creature screaming from the woods, so it could be a Bigfoot, and you can't have a list of scary things caught on video in a forest or in the woods without Bigfoot stuff. It's so necessary. I mean, it could be anything, but that doesn't sound like any sort of animal I've ever heard. Some people have made claims that it could be a howler monkey, but the video was taken in Georgia and there ain't no howler monkeys in Georgia, I'll tell you that much. At number 3 we have a man in the woods. If you spend a night in an abandoned hotel in the middle of the woods, there's a good chance that you're going to run into some sort of weird stuff that'll make you want to pee your pants. This was the plan of German YouTubers Iblali. They wanted to do something spooky for their fans. The footage was pretty creepy, and after they uploaded it, their fans found a little Easter egg. I don't know if you guys saw what was lurking in the shadows, but there was a man standing there, and they didn't notice that he was there until after they uploaded the video. Some people saw it and then highlighted it to the YouTubers. So who is this dude and why was he just following them in the woods? At number 2 we have Midnight Terror. So much of what happens in this video is horrifying. It's from the YouTube channel called MindSeeTV, and they decide to go find a bunch of condemned buildings in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night. Let's just go down the list of things that happen. First, someone starts following them as they're walking through the woods. You never see this person, but you can hear them whistling and you can hear their footsteps. Next, they hear this mystery stalker get very close to them, and they actually set up some bell tripwires, and the guy trips over them and they hear the bells ringing. Then they find the building, they go inside, and then they use this device to communicate with ghosts. This whole adventure is just one giant nope for me. I don't want anything to do with this, and I never want to hang out with these guys. Oh my god, they just seem like they attract terror or something. I don't like it. And for the number 1 spot, we have a horror scene. A hiker was walking through the woods. He follows a trail that leads to what seems to be some sort of small campsite set up in the middle of the woods. What he finds is very bizarre, unexplained, and terrifying. On several of the trees surrounding this makeshift campsite in the middle of the woods, it looks like there's signs set up. At first it seems like they could be some sort of wildlife warning, but on closer inspection you find this and it's horrifying.
Look what these fucking are.
On all the trees surrounding this area, there are missing person signs. What the hell is going on here? This looks like the scene out of a horror movie. All of these posters are from people who have actually gone missing and haven't been found. The man recording the video keeps filming a little while longer, and then he hears voices coming, so he hightails it out of there before whoever these people are can find him. Once he gets out of this terror scene, he contacts the police and gave them the GPS location that he got from his phone, and the police go to investigate. This entire scene was connected to a nearby property. They claim that it was all decoration for a Halloween party. It was the beginning of October, so it's possible that the signs were connected to some sort of Halloween party, but it seems like they've been up there for a long time. They all have water damage, some of them have holes in them. It is so creepy and so weird.